Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're tuning in for another episode of our little podcast here in this corner of our world. On today's episode of Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, I am delighted to welcome Danette Batiste. She is the CEO and Executive Director of Healthy Heart Nation, a nonprofit dedicated to improving health outcomes within the African American community. With over 25 years of experience in the IT sector, Danette has leveraged her expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion to drive significant cultural shifts in corporate environments. At Soft Choice and through her own consultancy, GID Consulting, she has developed strategies that enhance organizational performance and foster comprehensive trauma-informed workspaces, which is why we are so excited to have her today.
So my background, as you discussed, was in the IT industry. I started working, luckily, for an African-American woman who owned her own IT company. And this was back in the early 90s. And so, we were essentially really working to get contracts and expand our reach. As one of the only African American woman-owned companies doing this at that time. It was almost unheard of, right? So when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it didn't have those titles back then. But part of the role that we had to serve was to really be able to break into spaces where they did not typically see organizations that look like us, with people who look like us, providing the services that really are mission critical services. We did make an intentionality around ensuring that we hired people who look like us as well to support these environments, giving them entry level experience, giving them the roadmap to grow in this industry. And as a result of what we've done, a lot of the people that worked for us, back in the early 90s and 2000s have gone on to lead IT organizations. But again, it was only through getting that opportunity, that first entry, as well as ensuring that, the training and the experience and all of those things were there to ensure that not only the company was successful, but that the individuals that supported us were successful. And so that's the background that I come from. And as a result of trauma, from that organization, which I can explain now, the owner of the company passed away. And so, she died rather suddenly, and that was kind of a traumatic situation that, I was at that point in time the vice president of service delivery. And so in that instance, the keys were, one, to make sure that we were able to effectively communicate with our company, our team, the people who work for us. And the organization had 300 to 400 people throughout the US. In 40 different states. So it was necessary for us to get in front to communicate what happened, as well as to communicate what the contingency plan was as a result of her passing away. And so we had to do that with our employees. We had to do that with our contracts, with our customers, who really did rely on her as the face of the organization. And so, for me, in that moment, I realized that it's very important to ensure that you have transition planning, that you have, you build in that structure that means that not just one person who's engaging in everything. You've got to have someone else right along with her. And as a result, the owner of the company kind of had the chief operating officer who was with her. He knew every step she was taking and why. And so we were able to effectively communicate what those plans were, how we were going to continue to deliver, to meet our obligations, to keep the company moving forward. And, as a result of that, everyone, got on board, and the company grew, the 3 years after she passed away. but it was because she had the wisdom to ensure that someone knew what she was doing at all times. So that if something were to happen, nothing missed a step. And I can say, that even though we were traumatized with the loss, we continued to move forward because the plan was already there. So you can't develop that plan when trauma happens. It's got to be there before it happens, because then it's second nature. And
Yes.
so that is
So
what this
did that,
company did.
yeah. I think that's such an important piece when we're talking. First, I would just want to say sorry for the loss of your friend, right? Because
Yes,
that
yes.
I think is in business, especially, we just think this bad thing happened, but let's pull ourselves up and not ever talk about it again. And so I want to say that first, but you said something really important there, which was around this idea of you have to plan before it happens. When we're already in it, it's too late. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us, like, what are the initial steps that you take when integrating kind of a trauma and free environment with new and existing organizations? Like, how do you help them prepare?
I mean, it has to come from your leadership, right? And if you've got a leader that is open, that understands that growth is the most important thing within an organization. And in order to grow, I mean, the mindset for this person, her name was Marianne Mitchell. I want to make sure that I say her name because she deserves that acknowledgement. The company was called CC Ops. But like, she made sure that in any position that you had, she always told us to make sure that you're training your successor. And it wasn't that environment where it's like, okay, I've got to keep people out of what I'm doing, because you come from a scarcity environment, you come from a scarcity mindset. For her, it's like, listen, if you want to move up and you want to do something else, you've got to make sure that there's somebody under you who can do what you're doing. And so that is how she operated all the time. It wasn't, I'm going to pull the blinds back. I'm threatened by people. If they learn what I'm doing, they won't need me. That was never a part of her mindset. And as a result of that, that was the mindset of the people who worked there. Everyone had a successor. I had someone who could take my place so that I could move up and do something else. Everyone kind of trained along those lines. And so that was in terms of the creation of that process, it is truly ensuring that, if I'm not here tomorrow, someone else can pick up where I left off. And that's what we owed the company, and that's what we owed the people of the company. And so that's kind of technically, where it comes from. And, we would say, oh, like, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and, who's going to take over? And, you almost say that in a way, kind of jokingly. But unfortunately, this organization literally had one of our managers who was riding to work on a motorcycle and got hit by a bus and died. So we had to, again, use that same mindset and go into the environment where people are completely devastated at the loss. You cannot take away from that. The loss is real. And so, in those instances, of course, we made trauma counselors available to those who want to call in to be able to talk it through. But, the way that we were able to really keep people focused is that, like, listen, we owe it to these people to continue their legacy, to continue to operate in the way that they wanted us to continue to represent excellence, to continue to deliver. And, that is like the mindset that we continue to move forward in, not ignoring the trauma, but maybe using the trauma to springboard people into understanding what what the goal and mission of the organization was.
So, Danette, I love that. And Mary Ann sounds like someone that we would all like to work for, because that work culture starts from that place of trust and safety. So I'm just wondering, what happens when you're in a work environment that hasn't started on that culture?
That becomes extremely challenging. I've worked in environments where that wasn't the mindset, and it is very challenging sometimes for people to let go, to open up and not be threatened, especially, from people who can do their job. Like, a lot of times that becomes a problem, that the person that's working for me can do my job or maybe do my job better. And it is really about helping people understand that if you can get someone who can do your job, that bodes well for you. That looks great for you to have someone who can do your job. And you need to look for what else you can do and then continue to build the organization in that way. But it is very challenging. And I forget the name of the author right now, but the book Who Not How, to me is one that I have read. I have it up here, but I'm like I can't think of his name right now. I
That's
think it's
okay.
Hardy,
We'll put a link
something
in the
Dan
show
Hardy.
notes for
Yeah.
everybody to the book Who
Yes.
Not How. I love that.
Who
We
Not
love
How.
resources.
And
We love everybody.
yes. And that book was really important because it talks about, it is, if you're going to grow, then you've got to have people who can do what you're doing so you can go and do something else. And even if you're in a small business and you're growing the business, someone has to know what you're doing so that they can start doing it so that now you can go get more clients, right? You can get more opportunities. You can have other people that are able to deliver at the level that you were delivering. And that means you have to train them. That means you have to give them processes. That means you've got to give them the structure to be successful. The true testament of a successful organization is that it survives if you're not there, that it thrives if you're not there. But that is not typically the mindset. Like if I leave and everything goes hell, then that means I was a great leader. But that's really not.
Yeah, you can't micromanage, right? Which is really one of our trauma informed principles is you got to trust the people. That trust is a two-way street.
Yes, but trust comes training. You can't trust them if you haven't taught them, right? If you haven't given them the tools. And it is not just like, okay, you have to do it exactly my way, but you've got to give them the structure for them to be successful. And then you've got to trust them to do it their way, your way, or better, And so
So, Danette, how do you engage leadership or management teams to kind of maintain a trauma-free workplace? So let's just say, and we know getting there is a lot of work, but how do you maintain that, and how do you engage leadership so when you have those changes, that culture still exists and goes forward?
it is really about getting people when you're doing strategic planning, when you're doing, the operation planning, when you're setting the goals for the new year, that should definitely involve who is your successor, right? Who have you identified as your successor? And then you've really got to talk about why that is important. And then you have to demonstrate that. And the way that you demonstrate that is that when you have that next meeting that has that, that C-level manager in it, they should have their successor attending as well, right? So that you don't have to filter that information, that they understand what their role is, that they're seen at the table, that they're sitting there, that they're able to get comfortable in those spaces before they have to be in those spaces.
And how do we repair it when we mess up, right? Instead of just giving up on each other, how do we repair it? Because I think that piece for me is so crucial with organizations. So I want to talk about the DEI piece, but before we do that, can you just talk about how important is ongoing education in the mental health and trauma-informed workplace? And do we ever arrive? Because I think this is an important piece, that it's not a one and done kind of thing, right? So can you just talk about how important and critical that is in your view?
It is extremely important, right? Because we're all going through some trauma. There's not one single solitary person who isn't traumatized by something. Whether that's something they're dealing with now, something that they're dealing with that they had to deal with in the past, something that they don't even realize that they are dealing with, but it manifests itself in the way that they react and respond to everyone else. So it is very important to be able to understand that exists, whether it's spoken or unspoken, because it's very challenging to be vulnerable in your workspace.
Yeah, I think that thing you just said there, right? Vulnerable in the workplace. Is it safe to be vulnerable? Because we often ask people to be vulnerable and then we can hold that against them later on, right? Is yes, Danette, thank you for sharing. And that reminds me that I don't want to invite you to this piece, right? Like, and we say we don't do it, but that's part of the trauma informed is like seeing the connection of, are we living these values throughout, and have we ensured that the ERG groups are effective, inclusive, but are empowered to go do the thing we've asked them to do, and we're not just doing it for show, but that there's some meat behind it, and we've given, I don't know, dollars to support the things that they need to do as well, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And for the ERG groups specifically, I think that it is very important that they do hold two different types of sessions, like one, the internal safe space, like this is us, we can talk freely in this particular space. And even if that's kind of a mixer, or maybe even if that's kind of, like a social kind of thing where they can start to learn each other, because first they've got to build the relationships, and then they've got to be able to feel safe to talk about it. But then they also need to identify as a group, and what I recommend, things that they want the company to know about them. And then they use those to invite people to join discussions around what's it like to be a Black woman in the workplace, right?
I love that, Danette. Can you just talk a little bit about then what the challenges are, or maybe because I know your background's IT, maybe how technology plays a role, especially now with so many more remote and hybrid working settings? Because what I hear you saying with the ERG a lot is about that building of relationship. And then I think for a lot of the people listening, the worry is that's why everyone needs to be in office, which then, of course, presents a whole new kind of barrier and challenge for many employees. So, how can we use technology to create a trauma informed environment, still helping, still caring about our staff and mental health? But particularly now, as we see more and more remote and hybrid workers, what do you see as the role in that?
And, the organization that I previously worked for, they would do a lot of remote teams meetings, and even it would be like, okay, bring your favorite drink and your favorite snack, and, this would be an after hours type of event. And people would, join and, and start to share and talk to one another. But again, what's most important is that they have the space to get to know one another, because transparency is not going to come without relationship. They would do a lot of cahoots, games. You can do a lot of that remotely. And people are comfortable when they are in their own home, right? And they're able to share. So then when you are doing some kind of mixers locally, people are more prone to come into those. But, we did these things during the time of like high COVID, right? Where that wasn't an option to come in, right? And so people were looking for that community. They were looking for the place where they could connect. And so we did, see people really taking advantage of it. But again, and I don't know if I've mentioned this piece yet, but there's got to be some consistency.
Yeah. So I hear you saying that consistent relationships is really how we get to transparency and safety, right? And it's the balance of both of those in a lot of different kinds of ways. So I'm just wondering, Danette, you've been at this for a while. It's not the first round in this. As you look back on changes you've implemented, how society has changed, what advice would you give to your younger self about starting out in the DE&I space?
It's very interesting because, my younger self was fearless, because, it was, you have that passion, and you have that, I always had I always had in my heart and spirit the desire to ensure that there was equality. So, for me, I would just tell her, just keep doing what you're doing, and continue to learn, and don't be afraid in those moments where you were, and just keep moving it.
Yeah, I love that because I'm wondering the tie-in as we know politically in the United States right now, a lot of DEI positions and roles are being eliminated. names of those positions are being changed for all kinds of reasons. What advice would you give to leaders or folks in those organizations who are facing that? Maybe they receive funding that's requiring them to change, but they want to still keep pushing the work ahead. What can people do right now, even in the DEI space, if they can't do outwardly things? What are some other things that they can do to keep the ball moving forward?
Yeah, and when the tide started to change around the DE&I, like in the organization where I was previously working, for me it was really about, again, getting to where you need to go before you have to get there. And I really wanted to understand what was the true commitment of the organization, of their leadership to get there. Really talk to them and understand how their experiences line up with what you need. Because if you think about it, there's no candidate that has everything. Let's
That's
be honest, right?
let's say
But
that for the people in the back, Danette, that are
in the
listening.
back, there are
Some
no
leaders, right?
candidates.
Yeah.
Right,
Who are
right.
who are
There's
just
no one.
waiting for that perfect resume and it's not coming. It's not
But
coming,
let's be
right?
honest, they're looking for perfection in the DE&I. They're not looking for perfection outside of the DE&I. The DE&I candidate has to be absolutely perfect. For the DE&I side, a lot of times that person has to be perfect, and there is no perfection. There is no perfection. So, everyone has to be given an opportunity. Everyone has to be given a chance, regardless of who you hire. Sometimes, guess what? They don't work out. But the challenge is when you're doing a DE&I, hire and they don't work out, it's like, oh well, we don't need to, we tried. And hiring someone is always a consistent, situation. But the other part is really, what are you doing and what are you building behind that hire?
Yeah. And for me, I maybe we agree on this, maybe we don't. I'll let you tell me. But for me, it's like a DEI environment and a trauma informed environment can't survive exclusive of each other, right? Like they actually are so intertwined. So for me, regardless of if you call it DEI uh or justice work or trauma informed work or well being work, that these things are actually all intertwined because what they all have in common is we never arrive, right? Like it's never a checkbox of we've done that, now we're done, let's move on to the next thing on our strategic plan. It's like, no, this is work that's always ongoing. We're trying to always improve in.
Yes, and I agree with you 100%. That was perfectly said and stated.
I love when we agree. I love when we agree. So, considering the evolving landscape kind of workplace health, what are your primary goals for Healthy Heart Nation? Maybe over the next 3 to 5 years, Danette. Where do you see it going? What's on the outlook for you?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. And I did leave my DEI, position in December of last year to take on Healthy Heart Nation full time as a CEO and executive director. And Healthy Heart Nation, as you mentioned, is really about eliminating disparities in the Black and African American communities, right? And so the way that we do that is really looking at it from a four-prong approach, right? We look at it from the landscape of health and health professionals. We look at it at business and business professionals. We look at it from education and education professionals and justice. So those in the legal system, right? And so we consider those the four legs of the table. And on top of that table are our community initiatives, right? And so what we do is we feel like in a lot of instances, it's very siloed. Health people are talking to health people, right? Education, justice, business, they're all talking amongst themselves, but they're not talking together. And so what we've done is brought together over 150 ambassadors, is what we call them, that represent those four areas. And what we do is if we have a community initiative, we ensure that we have the collaboration of all four into building a successful program that we can duplicate, we can do consistently, and we can do in other states. So, for instance, one of our programs is the Pressure Project. And so, in that program, we're doing blood pressure measurements in churches and barbershops, right? It was an initiative that someone from a health standpoint brought us because we realized that in the African American community, Black community, high blood pressure is a lot of times overlooked. And it is almost like the gateway drug to, heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, all kinds of different health challenges.
We talk all the time about how racism is a public health crisis, right? And a lot of people don't understand the science behind that, about where adverse childhood experiences start, but even before that, how communities of color are specifically impacted. And that's why we say, like, communities of colors were impacted by COVID more, or are impacted, to your point, with high blood pressure. And Danette, I want to make sure I introduce you to my friends at Root Cause Organization,
Fantastic. Yes.
because I already want to nominate you for one of their awards, which, by the way, comes with money. So everybody loves an award that comes with money. So we're going to have to talk offline about all of those pieces, Danette, but it makes me so excited. Before we get to our quick fire questions today, Danette, I just want to know, what do you think is coming? Like, the evolving landscape of workplace health, like what are the trends, innovations that you think are going to be pivotal in the next couple of years that people should be tuning into?
Yeah, I am very excited about, AI, right? And AI can be a scary thing. And there is a lot of AI
Especially in the
concerns.
DE and I
Yes,
space,
you
right?
took
Yeah.
the words right out of my mouth, that part, right? It is really about creating environments that are inclusive, right?
I think it's a common theme. I think many of us are excited about the possibility of AI. And then in the background, of course, is the ethics and morals, right? Like, I mean, computers are only as good as the information put into computers. Implicit bias is real in all of us. And so, how do we? This is where I'd really love to know Marianne Mitchell's thoughts and
Oh my
ideas.
gosh. Yes,
What
I'm
she would,
telling you.
someone who
Uh,
was so forward thinking before her time anyway, would be the ideal person for me to say, and Marianne, what do you think about AI and where we're going?
I'm telling
For
you, you would have gotten a mouthful. Trust me when I tell you. She was
I
never shy about any of that.
I love it. So one of our favorite things for our listeners, Danette, is our quick fire, and I cannot wait to ask you these questions. So tell us, what's the latest book or television show that you're watching? What's the media that's consuming you right now?
So I don't know if I'm going to be happy about sharing this, but it's the truth. I've been watching House of Cards lately, especially with the election, going back and looking at the old ones. So it is a guilty pleasure that I have, but I am looking forward to looking at the new season of Lioness, which is coming out. The first season was amazing. So I'm excited about that. I am a huge John Wick fan. My husband is afraid because I love John Wick so much. So I'm really looking forward to the ballerina that is coming out, because I'm just obsessed with John Wick. And I tell him the reason that I like John Wick is because of the dialogue. And he looks at me like I'm crazy. But I know they're gonna shoot for about 2 hours, and they're gonna talk for about 15 minutes.
Danette, first off, I love your honesty. Thank you for that. Not just trying to say the thing you think everybody thinks you should say, because I just find so much that it is the weirdest show or movie that I'll be like, that's a trauma informed practice. Like, it's not its intended way, but it shows up sometimes in the most interesting of places. So I appreciate that. If you
Yes,
could
and the
have
book that I'm reading
yeah,
is this. It's called Mindset Training:
love
Conquer Your
this.
Mind and the Rest Will Follow. And it is by Nakishia Hammond. And so, and it definitely falls in line. It's very important. It's talking about self-care and it being selfish. And then the last book that I want to talk to you about is a book that was written by my husband, so I'm totally biased. Yes, it's totally biased, and it's called Selfish, a cardiologist, approach to healing a broken heart. And his book really does focus on the selfish principles, which you'll learn about. But it's really about being able to take care of yourself so that you can be of benefit to others. And so we do have to be selfish as it relates to supporting ourselves, so that we can be stronger, that I can help you and you can help me. but we can't do that if we're broken vessels, right? The water's spilling out of our, of our vessel if we can't, be able to look inward first before we look outside. And so, I love his book. It really talks about those principles. And, the selfish stands for, words, different words. So, I definitely recommend everyone to go out and read it.
We'll put links to the show notes to all 3 of these books, but it resonates with me because I always say you can only give what you're overflowing with.
Yes, that is beautiful. That's beautiful.
Okay, if you could have dinner with any historical figure or contemporary leader, who would you choose and what is the one question you would want to ask them?
Yeah, and for that, it would be my grandmother. And, she passed away.
Whose name is, we'll just...
Annie Bryant.
Annie Bryant.
Annie Bryant. And she passed away, in the 60s. So I never got to meet her or get to know her. She was an educator from Atmore, Alabama. And, she had a seizure, unfortunately, while she was driving. But of course, as a result of the race issue, she was not taken to, the proper hospital where she could have potentially been, saved. But, in terms of how she raised my father and my aunt, in that time period and why she felt education was so important, and some of the challenges that she faced, I would love to be able to have gotten a chance to know her.
Oh, love that. Last one. What's the hobby or activity that's filling you with joy? That just makes your heart sing.
I love going for a walk in nature and just getting, sunlight and just putting on some headsets and listening to some music. And, I get lost in that. Sometimes I'm just, I'm just going to go down here and turn around. And the next thing you know, I've been walking for 90 minutes, So I can really sort through things that are going on in my mind, in my heart. And getting that sunlight and that fresh air is so necessary as it relates to just reinforcing not only your mind, your body, but your spirit.
I love that. Danette, it's been a pleasure having you on. I hope you'll come back and join us again. But how can our listeners find you? What's the best platform, websites? How can they learn more about you and the work that you do?
Sure. So our website for Healthy Heart Nation is www.myhhn.org. So that stands for myhealthyheartnation.org. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And that's just Danette Batiste. I'm on Instagram as the same. I don't have any creative names. I just, it's just, it's just
we like being able to find you. We like being able to find you.
Yes. And that's it.
We love it. Danette, I hope our listeners go and check out all the amazing work that you're doing. I'm heading over there right now. For our listeners, thank you so much for tuning into Mindful Management, creating a trauma-informed work environment. For more resources and helpful tools, check our show notes today for all of the books and resources that Danette talked about, or head over to chefaloconsulting.com. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, show your support, like, comment, follow, and review this episode on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and brings even better content your way. And we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube to share what topics you'd like us to cover or who you'd like to see as our next guest. Maybe it's you. Voices matter. Diverse voices matter. And so we'd love to hear from you. So if you know someone or you would like to be a guest, please check the show notes of this episode. We're always looking to chat with more people. Thanks again for listening. And remember, we can do hard things. We can talk about hard things. We can do hard things one step at a time, one relationship at a time. Until next time, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Danette, again for coming on. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, Chefalo, mindfulconsulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening, and remember, change happens one step at a time.